The piano in the corner of the Gilded Spur saloon was missing 2 keys in the upper register and had not been tuned since it arrived by wagon 4 years prior. The sound it produced was a tinny, desperate approximation of music, loud enough to be heard over the shouting of the miners and the clack of poker chips. Rosalie stood just behind the filthy curtain that separated the bar from the small, raised stage. She closed her eyes for a moment, but the smell pushed through. Stale beer, unwashed bodies, cheap whiskey, and the metallic tang of fresh mud coating the floor. "Get on out there, girl," Jasper Dunn hissed, his voice close to her ear. Rosalie's eyes snapped open. She did not look at him. She looked only at the splintered floorboards of the stage. Her stage, her prison. She stepped out into the yellow lamplight. A roar went up from the crowd. They were men starved of civilization, men who dug in the dirt all day and sought to wash the grime away with liquor and noise. They saw her, but they did not see her. They saw the thin, faded calico dress that Jasper forced her to wear, the pale skin of her arms, the dark hair pinned up loosely. The piano man, a drunkard named Silas, began his pounding rhythm. Rosalie lifted her arms. The movement was stiff, mechanical. She executed a turn, her bare feet dragging on the rough wood. A splinter, sharp and hot, drove into the sole of her left foot. She did not wince. Her face remained a perfect, hollow mask. Her eyes were fixed on the back wall. Seeing nothing, she was dancing, but it was the ghost of a dance. Once, there had been polished floors. Once, there had been a violin, its notes clean and soaring in a bright room in Philadelphia. She remembered the scent of lemon oil on the wooden bar, the soft scrape of satin slippers. She remembered her mother, Camille, sitting in the corner, her hands folded in her lap, coughing quietly into a linen handkerchief but smiling. Her mother's smile had been the only warmth Rosalie had ever truly known. "Grace, Rosalie," her mother used to whisper, her voice thin as spun glass. "Even when you are still, you must have grace. It comes from inside." Now, there was no grace. There was nothing inside. A heavy-bearded miner threw a copper cent. It struck Rosalie in the chest, stinging her skin through the thin fabric. She continued her rigid movements, a marionette whose strings were tangled. Her mother had died in the winter, the sickness finally taking the last of her breath. Rosalie, barely 17, had been left with him, her stepfather, a man who smelled of brandy and sweet cigars, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. He had cried at the funeral, but 2 weeks later he was rattling dice against the study wall. He had lost everything, the house, the furniture, her mother's jewelry, and finally, he had lost her. Rosalie forced her leg into an extension it could no longer gracefully hold. The muscles in her thigh burned with protest. "You'll be a star, Rosalie," her stepfather had said, packing her bag himself. "A great opportunity in the West. A theatrical promoter wants you." The promoter was Jasper Dunn. The theater was the Gilded Spur. The opportunity was debt bondage. He had sold her, plain and simple, for $200 of gambling debts. Jasper watched her from the bar, his arms folded over his silk waistcoat. He was a clean man in a dirty town, which made him the most dangerous thing there. He was wiping a glass, but his eyes were on her. He noted her vacant stare, her lack of energy. He wanted a performance. He wanted her to smile, to pretend she enjoyed the leers and the shouts. Rosalie saw his expression darken. She knew that look. It meant pain later. She forced her lips to pull back from her teeth. It was not a smile. It was a grimace, a baring of teeth like a trapped animal. It was hideous, but it satisfied the men. They bellowed and stamped their feet. The dance was supposed to last 3 songs. It felt like 3 years. When the piano finally crashed to a halt, the applause felt like blows. Rosalie turned, her back stiff, and walked through the curtain. Jasper was waiting. He did not raise his voice. He never did, not when he was truly angry. He simply reached out and gripped her upper arm, his fingers digging in. "That was pathetic, girl," he whispered, his breath smelling of cloves. They pay to see a dancer, not a corpse. You look sour. Tomorrow night, you look happy. You smile. Or you don't eat." He shoved her toward the back hallway. "Now clean up this pigsty. The floor is covered in mud and tobacco spit." She nodded, her eyes still distant. She fetched the bucket and the mop. For an hour, she moved between the tables, invisible to the men who had just been hooting at her. They spilled beer near her, knocked over chairs, and never once looked down. When the last gambler stumbled out into the pre-dawn cold, Jasper locked the front door. He motioned to the bar. "Wipe it. Every bottle." She did. When she was finished, the sky outside was a pale, sickly gray. Jasper inspected her work, grunted, and pulled a large iron key from his pocket. He handed it to her. Rosalie took it. She walked to the narrow door at the end of the hall, the one marked storage. She unlocked it, stepped inside, and locked it again from the inside. This was her room. It was not a room, it was a closet, smelling of damp burlap, rodent droppings, and aging whiskey from a leaking barrel in the corner. There was no window, only a small cot shoved against the wall, its mattress thin and stained. She sank onto the cot, her body trembling now that the performance was over. The adrenaline faded, leaving only the deep, aching pain. She lifted her dress. A dark, ugly bruise was already forming on her arm where Jasper had gripped her. Her feet were raw. She sat for a moment, tracing the angry red line of a fresh splinter before she pulled it free with her fingernails. She had been here for 8 months. 8 months of this room, this stage, this death. She laid back on the cot, pulling a threadbare blanket over her. She did not cry. Crying was a luxury she had given up, along with hope and grace, and the memory of her mother's smile. She simply closed her eyes and disappeared inside herself, waiting for the darkness to take her. Miles away. The sun was just striking the peaks of the mountains. The air was so cold it burned the lungs, but it was clean. Thorne breathed it in. He had been in the high country for 3 months, checking his trap lines. The winter had been good. His pack mule was heavy with beaver and fox pelts, cured and bundled. He, himself, was a quiet man, etched with the kind of stillness that only long solitude can bring. He was tall, dressed in buckskin and worn wool, his face shadowed by a low-brimmed hat. A scar, white and jagged, ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw, a relic of a life he had tried to bury. He guided his horse and mule down the winding trail toward the cluster of ramshackle buildings in the valley below. Junction. He hated the town. It was noise and greed, a raw wound carved into the land, but he was out of coffee, salt, and cartridges. He arrived just before noon. He tied his animals outside the general store, his movements economical and sure. He sold his furs to the proprietor, haggling in a low voice that held no room for argument. He got a fair price. He spent the next hour gathering his supplies: flour, beans, coffee, a side of bacon, 2 boxes of shells for his rifle. He loaded the mule, checking the straps twice. He figured to be back in his cabin by nightfall, but the ride had been long, and the dust was thick in his throat. He decided on 1 drink, just one, to cut the trail dust before he left the stench of civilization behind. He pushed open the swinging doors of the Gilded Spur. The saloon was quiet. It was too early for the miners. A few listless gamblers played cards at a corner table. The bartender, Gus, was wiping the bar. "Whiskey," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble. Gus poured. Thorne took the glass and moved to a table in the darkest corner, his back to the wall. He always sat with his back to the wall. He drank slowly, letting the raw liquor burn. He was halfway through the glass when Jasper Dunn came down the stairs, whistling. Thorne disliked him on sight. Dunn was too clean, his waistcoat too bright. He looked like a spider. Dunn spoke to Gus, then nodded toward the stage. "Sun's down. Tell her it's time." Gus looked surprised. "Already? Boss? Ain't nobody here." "I don't care," Jasper said. "She's lazy. Needs the practice. Get her out here." Thorne paid them no mind. He was thinking of the ride home, of the silence of the pines, He finished his whiskey and stood up, ready to leave. Just as he turned toward the door, the curtain pulled back. Rosalie stepped out. Thorne stopped. He had seen saloon girls before, painted and loud, laughing too hard. This was not one of them. She was pale, thin, and looked breakable. The dress she wore was cheap, but it couldn't hide the way she held herself, with a strange, broken stiffness that spoke of formal training. Then the piano started. That same awful, tinny sound. She began to move. Thorne watched, and the mild annoyance he felt at the town curdled into something cold and hard. He was not a man who knew anything about dancing, but he knew animals and traps. He knew the look of a wild thing caught in teeth of steel, waiting for the hunter to return. He saw it in her. Her movements were pained. Her eyes were not vacant. They were gone. She was performing, but she was not there. He saw the way she flinched when the piano player hit a loud, jarring chord. He saw her force that terrible, agonizing smile. He turned his gaze from her to Jasper Dunn, who was watching her with an expression of smug ownership. Thorne sat back down. He waited until the song ended and she disappeared. He walked to the bar. Another. He said, Gus poured, eyeing the stranger. Quiet one, ain't ya? Thorne nodded, pushing the glass back. The girl, the dancer. Rosalie, Gus offered, wiping his hands on a filthy apron. Dunn's little songbird. Pretty, ain't she? Though too skinny for my taste. She looks sick, Thorne said. It was not a question. Gus shrugged. She's particular. Keeps to herself. Dunn's property. You know, bought her contract back east. The word grated on Thorne. Property. What does that mean, property? Means she owes him, Gus said, lowering his voice. Gambling debt. I heard from her stepfather. She dances to pay it off. And when is it paid? Gus gave a short, cynical laugh. You ask Dunn. Never. The interest is high. She ain't allowed to leave. Not that she's got anywhere to go. Thorne's hand tightened on his glass. He had seen this before. Maybe not in a saloon, but he had seen men own other men, own women. It was the world he had fought a war to stop. And here it was, in a dirty saloon in the middle of nowhere. He nursed the whiskey. He waited. The afternoon bled into evening. The saloon filled. The smoke grew thick, the noise pounding against his skull. He hated it, but he did not leave. At 9 o'clock, Jasper Dunn clapped his hands. Gentlemen, the main attraction, our very own, the Rose of Philadelphia. The miners roared. Rosalie came out. She saw the crowd, the smoke, the 100 greedy eyes. Her gaze swept over them, distant, bracing for the humiliation. Then she saw him, the man in the corner. He was still there. He hadn't moved in hours. The tall stranger with the scarred face. He was not shouting. He was not jeering. He was not throwing coins. He was just watching her. His eyes were dark under the brim of his hat, and his gaze was steady. It was quiet. It was the quietest thing in the room, and it unsettled her more than all the shouting. The other men looked at her, looked through her, devoured her. This man, he seemed to see her. He saw the pain in her feet, the stiffness in her arms. She could feel his gaze like a physical weight. But it was different. It did not demand, it simply observed. It scared her. Anything different was dangerous. She began her dance. She tried to look away from him, to retreat into the safe, empty place in her mind. But she kept feeling those eyes. She faltered, her ankle turning. She recovered quickly, but she knew he had seen it. When the dance ended, she fled the stage, her heart hammering for the first time in months. Thorne watched her go. He stood up, the chair scraping loud in the sudden lull. He threw a coin on the bar for Gus. He walked toward the back hallway. He saw her carrying a tray of empty glasses. Her head was down. Jasper was at the bar, counting the night's receipts. Thorne tore a scrap of paper from the supply list in his pocket. He pulled the small pencil nub he kept for marking traps. He wrote 9 words. He took a 25-cent piece from his pocket. He folded the paper around the coin. He walked past her. He did not slow down. He did not look at her. As he passed, he pressed the small, heavy packet into her hand. Her fingers were cold. "For you," he murmured, so low no one else could hear. And then he was gone. The swinging doors sighed shut behind him, leaving only the smell of cold night air. Rosalie stood frozen, the metal coin heavy in her palm. She expected a pinch, a crude grab. It did not come. She shoved the object into her apron pocket. Her hands were shaking. She finished her work. She wiped the tables. She mopped the floor again. Jasper locked the doors. He gave her the key to the storage room. She locked the door behind her. The bolt sliding home was the only sound. She sat on the lumpy cot, her breathing shallow. She waited, listening to the silence. Finally, she reached into her pocket. Her fingers fumbled with the paper. She uncurled it. The silver coin, a quarter, rolled into her lap, bright against the drab blanket, by the sliver of moonlight that forced its way through a crack in the wall. She read the words. They were written in a strong, clear hand. "You shouldn't dance for them. You're worth more than this." Rosalie stared at the paper. She read the words again and again. She traced the letters with her finger. She had been called a whore, a stray, a debt, Dunn's property. She had been called lazy and sour and pathetic. But no one, not since her mother died, had called her worth more. A single, hot tear, shocking in its suddenness, escaped her eye. It rolled down her cheek and splashed onto the paper. She wiped it away, angry at the weakness. Hope was a foolish, dangerous thing. It was a lie, but she did not throw the paper away. She clutched it, and the coin, tight in her hand, as she lay down in the cold. Dark room. Rosalie's world. Once a gray, soundless void, now had a sharp, metallic object in it. The note and the 25-cent piece lived under the thin, stained mattress of her cot, in the absolute dark of the storage room. After Jasper had locked her in, she would slide her hand beneath the straw ticking and touch the cold silver. She was suspicious. The man had given it to her and walked away. Men did not walk away. They lingered, they watched, they waited for their payment. This stranger's act was a stone dropped into the stagnant water of her life, and the ripples terrified her. She would wait until the saloon's noise was long dead, until she was sure Jasper was asleep in his room upstairs. Then she would retrieve the note. She could not light a candle. The smoke would betray her. She had to wait for the thin, gray hour before dawn, when just enough light leaked through the crack in the wall. "You shouldn't dance for them. You're worth more than this." She had memorized the words. She traced them, her fingers rough against the scrap of paper. Worth more. It was a language she no longer understood. Worth was measured in cents thrown on a stage, in drinks purchased, in the $200 of her stepfather's debt. Jasper reminded her of that debt daily. The words stirred something painful. It was a thin, sharp ache beneath her ribs, a feeling she had ruthlessly suffocated for months. It was hope. It felt like swallowing glass. Hope made her present. Hope made her feel the splinters in her feet, the hollow ache in her stomach, the raw sting of Jasper's anger. Without hope, she could float away, disappearing into the hollow mask she wore. With it, she was trapped. Her body was here, in this room, on this cot, and it was worthless. Jasper noticed the change. It was not a grand rebellion. It was microscopic. It was a tension in her shoulders. It was the way her eyes, once vacant, now seemed to be hiding something in their depths. She was withdrawn, but it was no longer the withdrawal of a beaten dog. It was the quiet, hard withdrawal of a thing that has found a secret. He sensed she was holding something back. He grew harsher. "You look like you swallowed a wasp, girl," he snapped at her after a performance. His voice a low growl that cut through the bar noise. "I pay for you to dance. I pay for you to look pretty. You are not looking pretty. You are looking defiant." "I am tired," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Tired?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. He followed her as she carried a tray of dirty glasses. You'll be tired when I say you're tired. He cornered her by the back door. You smile when you're on that stage. You make them feel welcome. You make them want to spend their money. If they don't spend, you don't eat. Is that clear? She nodded, her eyes fixed on his waistcoat button. But the next night, she could not. The smile would not form. She thought of the note. She thought of the scarred man's quiet gaze. She saw the leering faces of the miners, and her mouth set in a hard, straight line. She performed the steps, but her face was a cold, beautiful tragedy. Jasper was livid. That night, he locked her in the storage room without her meager supper of stale bread and cold beans. "We'll see how you smile when you're hungry," he hissed through the door. She sat in the dark, her stomach cramping. She slid her hand under the mattress. She held the coin. It was heavy. It was real. She did not cry. She just waited. 3 days passed. 3 days of one scant meal. 3 nights of performing to the brink of collapse. Her body lightheaded with hunger. She was sweeping the floor in the flat. Dead light of midday when the saloon doors swung open. Thorne entered. He looked different in the daylight. The shadows were gone, and she could see the scar on his jaw clearly. It was an old wound, healed poorly, pulling the skin tight. His eyes, clear and gray as a winter sky, found her instantly. Rosalie froze, the broom halfway through a stroke. Jasper was at the bar, counting receipts. He looked up, his eyes narrowing at the stranger's return. Thorne did not waste time. He walked directly to the bar. He wore the same heavy coat, and he did not remove his hat. "I'm here about the girl," he said. His voice was low, but it filled the empty room. Jasper stopped counting. He leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, you a connoisseur, are you? She's not for rent, if that's what you're asking." "I'm not asking," Thorne said. "I want to buy her contract. Her debt." Rosalie's heart stopped. Jasper stared at him for a long moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, mocking sound that echoed off the bare walls. "Buy her? You think you've got the money for that?" "How much?" Thorne asked. He was impossibly still. "Her debt is considerable," Jasper said, tapping his ledger. "She's a high-class girl from back east. Cost a fortune to bring her here. Her debt stands at $300. Rosalie knew this was a lie. Her stepfather's note had said $200. Thorne's expression did not change. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He untied it and dropped a small stack of coins on the polished wood. $20, Thorne said. Jasper looked at the money. He looked at Thorne. He laughed again, harder this time. An insulting, cruel sound. $20? Is that a joke? That might buy you a look. Get out of here. Cowboy, you're wasting my time. He shoved the coins back toward Thorne. She's a skinny, sour little thing. Jasper continued, his voice turning mean as he glanced at Rosalie. But she's my skinny, sour little thing. And she's not for sale. Not for $20. Not for anything you have. Now get out. Rosalie watched Thorne. He did not move. He looked at Jasper, his gray eyes unblinking. She saw his jaw tighten, the scar turning white. For a second, she thought he would hit him. She thought he would draw the gun she saw holstered at his hip. Instead, he slowly, deliberately, scooped the coins back into his pouch. He tied it. He gave Jasper one last, long look. Then he turned and walked out. The doors swung shut. Rosalie's breath, which she hadn't realized she was holding, came out in a painful rush. The hope that had flared like wildfire turned to ash. Of course, it was a game. He was just another man, playing a game. Jasper sneered at her. See that? $20. That's what your big admirer thinks you're worth. Now get back to work. The floor won't sweep itself. That night, the saloon was full. It was Saturday, and the miners had their pay. The air was thick with smoke and the roar of 100 conversations. Rosalie felt the exhaustion and hunger as a dizzy, floating sensation. And then she saw him. He was back, sitting in the exact same corner, at the same table, his back to the wall. A glass of whiskey sat untouched in front of him. Her stomach twisted. He hadn't left town. He was watching. Jasper saw him too. The saloon owner grinned, pleased at the attention. He thought the man was just another customer, come to stare at his property. Rosalie danced. She danced through a haze of fear and confusion. Why was he here? What did he want? His quiet, steady presence was 1,000 times more unnerving than the drunken catcalls. When the performance ended, she fled the stage. "Girl," Jasper called. "Back room. Bucket's full. Dump it." She nodded. It was one of her last tasks of the night, hauling the heavy bucket of filthy wash water full of mud, tobacco spit, and spilled liquor out the back door. She wrestled the bucket down the short, dark hallway. She pushed the door open with her shoulder. The alley was pitch black and freezing. The stench of refuse was overwhelming. She dragged the bucket toward the rain barrel where she was supposed to dump it. A shadow detached itself from the wall. Rosalie cried out, stumbling back, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's just me." Thorne's voice. He stepped into the weak rectangle of light spilling from the doorway. "You startled me," she whispered, her heart hammering. "I tried to buy your paper," he said. He did not move closer. "I heard—" She looked down, her hands twisting in her apron. "You should leave. You must leave. If he sees you—" "He won't. You don't understand," she said, her voice desperate. She had to make him go. He was endangering her. Jasper would see this as her fault. "He will hurt me. He will lock me up. Why are you doing this?" She finally looked at him, her eyes wide with fear and a flicker of anger. "Men don't help without a price. What is it you want?" She knew what men wanted. She braced herself for the crude offer, for the demand. Thorne looked at her for a long time. The silence stretched, broken only by the tinny piano inside. His scarred face was impossible to read in the gloom. "You're hungry," he said. It was not a question. She flinched, as if he had struck her. He reached into his heavy coat. Rosalie took an involuntary step back, her hand finding the cold wood of the wall. He did not pull out a gun. He did not pull out money. He pulled out a small parcel wrapped in cloth. "I brought you this." He held it out. It was bread, a thick slice of it, and a piece of dried venison. Rosalie stared at the food. She stared at his hand. This was not a price. This was food. She had not eaten in nearly 2 days. The smell of the bread made her dizzy. I can't," she whispered. "If Jasper found it—" "Take it," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Eat it later." "In your room." She heard a loud laugh from inside the saloon. Jasper's. Panic seized her. She darted forward, her hand snatching the parcel. It was warm from his coat. She shoved it deep into her apron pocket. "Go," she pleaded, her back to the door. "Please, go now." He did not move for a second, his eyes holding hers. Then he nodded. Once. He stepped back into the shadows and was gone. Rosalie leaned against the wall, her knees weak. She dumped the heavy bucket, her arms shaking, and hurried back inside, the weight of the bread a terrifying, wonderful secret against her stomach. She had to dance one more time. The final performance of the night. She stepped onto the stage. Thorne was still in his corner. The room was spinning slightly, but she felt a strange, brittle strength. She had food in her pocket. She began to move. A large miner, a man named Abel, drunk on cheap whiskey and losses at the poker table, was sitting near the stage. He had been watching her all night. As Rosalie turned, her skirt flaring, Abel lunged. He didn't just touch her, he grabbed her. His thick, powerful hand closed around her waist, and he yanked her clean off the stage. Rosalie screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror. She fell against the table, scattering cards and chips. Abel laughed, pulling her onto his lap. "That's it, little bird. Dance for old Abel. Give us a real kiss." His arm wrapped around her like a steel band, crushing the air from her lungs. He shoved his face toward hers, his breath hot and foul. The saloon erupted. The piano stopped. A chair crashed over. It happened faster than a man could blink. One moment, Thorne was in the corner. The next, he was there. He moved with a silent, terrifying swiftness. He did not shout. He did not warn. He grabbed the back of Abel's shirt collar, hauling the big man's head back. With his other hand, Thorne hit him. It was one punch. A short, brutal, calculated blow to the man's face. The sound was a wet, sickening crack. Abel's head snapped back. Blood exploded from his nose. His grip on Rosalie went slack, and he slumped sideways, unconscious before he hit the floor. The saloon went dead silent. Rosalie scrambled away, crab walking backward until she hit the stage, pulling herself up, shaking so hard she could not stand. Thorne did not look at her. He bent down, grabbed the front of Abel's bloody shirt, and began to drag him. He hauled the 200-pound man across the floor as if he were a sack of feed, dragged him through the mud and spit, straight to the swinging doors, and threw him out into the street. He turned back. His face was cold. His gray eyes were not quiet. They were lethal. He scanned the room, and every miner who met his gaze looked away. Jasper Dunn finally found his voice. He was pale, his hand shaking as he pointed at Thorne. "You're a madman!" he shrieked. "Assault! That's assault! I'm getting the sheriff! Gus, go get the sheriff!" You'll hang for this." Thorne ignored him. He walked to the bar, moving with that same deliberate, unhurried pace. He reached into his coat. He pulled out the heavy leather pouch and slammed it onto the bar. The sound was a solid, heavy thud. "Forget the sheriff," Thorne said. His voice was low, but it cut through the room like a razor. Jasper, who had started to move, froze. "What?" "I'm buying the girl." Thorne untied the pouch and poured a cascade of gold and silver coins onto the wood. "I'm not asking." He began to count, separating coins with his finger. $100. Jasper stared at the pile of money. It was a fortune. It was more than he'd see in 6 months, but his authority had been challenged. "I told you," Jasper stammered, trying to regain his footing. "She's not for—" Thorne looked up from the money. He leaned in, and his voice dropped. "I am not negotiating. You will take this money, or I will wait for the sheriff. And I will tell him, and every man in this room, exactly what kind of man you are. I'll tell them about the bruises. I'll tell them about the storage room you lock her in. I'll tell them about the starvation." He leaned closer. "Or maybe I'll just burn this pigsty to the ground, with you in it." The threat was not loud, but it was absolute. Jasper Dunn looked at the cold, hard face of the man in front of him. He looked at the pile of gold. He looked at the blood on the floor. He saw no bluff. He saw only a man who would do exactly what he said. With a shaking hand, Jasper swept the coins into his grasp. "Fine," he spat, his voice trembling with rage and fear. "Take the damaged goods. She's ruined anyway. She ain't worth spit." The words struck Rosalie, but she felt numb, distant. Thorne did not acknowledge Jasper. He turned his head and looked at Rosalie, who was still clinging to the side of the stage, her knuckles white. His eyes were quiet again. His voice, when he spoke to her, was soft. "Get your things." She stared at him, uncomprehending. What was happening? He said. Thorne said, turning his gaze back to Jasper with pure contempt. "She ain't worth spit." He looked back at Jasper, a cold, thin smile touching his lips. "She'll dance for joy next time." He nodded to Rosalie. "Go." She moved. Her legs were numb, but they obeyed. She walked past the silent tables, past the men, past Jasper, who was clutching his money. She walked down the dark hall to the storage room. She unlocked the door. She looked inside. Her things. She had nothing. She bent and slid her hand onto the mattress. She pulled out the folded note and the silver quarter. She shoved them deep into her pocket. Alongside the bread and meat, she grabbed the thin, threadbare blanket from the cot. It was the only thing in the world that was hers. She walked back out. The saloon was as she left it. Thorne was by the door. waiting. Jasper was behind the bar, pouring himself a large whiskey. Rosalie did not look at Jasper. She did not look at Thorn. She walked straight to the swinging doors and pushed them open. The cold night air hit her like a physical blow. She was outside. She was not being watched. She was out. She stood on the boardwalk, holding the blanket, shivering. Thorn emerged behind her. He walked to his horse and mule. Tied to the rail, he untied the horse's reins, his movements fluid. He swung himself up into the saddle. He looked down at her. Rosalie stood, a small, lost figure in the muddy street. She had nowhere to go. She was free from Jasper, but what was she now? Where are we going?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "My cabin. In the mountains. It's safe." He held his hand down to her. She looked at his hand. It was broad, calloused. It was the hand that had struck Abel. It was the hand that had offered her bread. She had no choice. To stay in town meant Jasper would find a way to reclaim her, or another man would simply take her. She was a thing bought. She belonged to him now. She had just traded one master for another. She put her cold, trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, sure. In one smooth motion, he pulled her up, settling her in the saddle in front of him. She was rigid, her body held stiffly, trying not to touch him. She was pressed against his chest. He was solid and warm. He clicked his tongue. The horse moved, pulling the pack mule behind it. They walked down the center of the dark street. Windows glowed yellow, but no one came out. No one stopped them. They passed the last building, the assayer's office, and the town fell away. The trail opened up into the blackness of the pine forest. The wind sharpened, cutting through her thin calico dress. The cold was immediate, brutal. She began to shiver, deep, racking shudders that shook her entire body. Thorn felt her trembling. He said nothing. He slowed the horse to a walk, keeping one hand on the reins. He used the other to unbutton his heavy, sheepskin-lined wool coat. He shrugged his left arm out, then his right, maneuvering the heavy garment around her. He settled the coat over her shoulders, pulling it around her body. It was huge. It enveloped her. It smelled of wood smoke, pine needles, and clean leather. And it was warm. Incredibly, deeply warm. Holding the heat from his body, he pulled the collar up around her neck. "Hold on," he said, his voice a low rumble by her ear. Rosalie clutched the lapels of the coat. She buried her face in the soft wool lining, inhaling the scent of it. She did not speak. She did not cry. She just held on, her small, cold body wrapped in his warmth, as the horse carried them miles into the dark, silent mountains. The ride was a blur of cold and motion. Rosalie was adrift in the space between the profound terror of the saloon and the unknown dread of what came next. She was cocooned in Thorn's coat, a heavy, warm shell that smelled of the forest. She did not feel the man behind her, only the solid wall of his chest and the heat radiating from him. She was small, and he was large, and he had bought her. The thought repeated, a dull, thudding rhythm in her mind. He had bought her. She did not know how long they rode. Hours. The moon climbed high, casting the pines as tall, black specters against the snow-dusted ground. The horse's breath plumed in the frigid air. The only sounds were the creak of the saddle leather and the steady, muffled hoof falls of the horse and the mule. Thorn did not speak. He did not shift or sigh. He rode with a stillness that was almost inhuman, a part of the mountain itself. Rosalie was dazed, her body numb with cold despite the coat, her mind numb with shock. She had been taken, again, sold by one man, bought by another. The 25-cent coin in her pocket felt heavy, a cruel joke. "You're worth more than this." He had paid $100. She wondered, in a dull, distant way, what that much money required of her. The trail steepened, the air grew thinner, cleaner. The horse labored, and finally, they crested a ridge. Below them, tucked into a small clearing sheltered by enormous spruce trees, was a cabin. It was small, lightless, a dark shape against the snow. Smoke trickled from its stone chimney, a thin gray line against the stars. Thorn guided the horse to the front of the cabin. He stopped, and the silence rushed in, vast and deep. "We're here," he said. His voice, so close to her ear, made her jump. He swung his leg over the back of the horse, landing softly in the snow. He stood for a moment, looking up at her. Rosalie did not move. She was frozen, clutching the coat. "You can get down," he said. She couldn't. Her legs were numb, her body stiff. She was terrified to move, to break the spell. He waited another second. Then, without a word, he reached up. His hands, large and rough, spanned her waist. Rosalie flinched. A sharp, violent tremor, and a small, choked sound escaped her. His hands stopped instantly. They did not tighten. They did not pull. They just rested on her waist. Not demanding, just offering support. "I won't hurt you," he said, his voice low and flat, as if stating a fact like the sky was dark. "You're stiff from the cold. Let me help you down." She gave a short, jerky nod. His grip was firm, impersonal. He lifted her from the saddle as if she weighed nothing, his strength effortless. He set her on her feet on the small porch. Her legs buckled, and he steadied her, his hand on her elbow for just a second before he released her. He left her there, a trembling figure huddled in his coat, and moved to tend the animals. She watched him, a shadow against the snow, his movements economical and sure. He unsaddled the horse, tethered it and the mule in a small, roofed lean-to, gave them feed, and broke the ice in their water trough with his boot heel. He did all this before he returned to the porch. He carried his saddlebags and rifle. He pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked the heavy wooden door. He pushed it open and stepped aside. "Go in," he said. "It's warm." Rosalie hesitated. The darkness inside was absolute. "I'll get the lamp," he said. Sensing her fear, he stepped past her. She heard him strike a match. A soft, yellow light bloomed inside. It was not the garish, smoky light of the saloon. It was a single oil lamp on a rough-hewn table. The cabin was one room. It was not the pigsty she had expected. It was meticulously clean. The floor was swept. In the far corner, a large stone hearth held a bed of glowing coals that radiated a deep, steady warmth. A narrow bed, covered with thick furs, was built into the opposite wall. There was a table, 2 chairs, and shelves holding tins, jars, and a few books. It smelled of pine, wood smoke, and curing leather. It was the scent of the man himself. Rosalie stood just inside the door, lost. She was an intrusion, a stain of saloon dust in this clean, quiet place. Thorn set his rifle on a rack by the door. He did not look at her. He moved to the hearth, added a split log to the coals. Sparks flew up, and the log caught, flames licking at the dry wood. The cabin brightened. He turned, finally, and saw her standing there, a ghost in his coat, her own thin blanket clutched in her hand. "You can take the bed," he said, nodding toward the fur-covered cot. Rosalie's head snapped up. The bed. It was always the bed. Her entire body went rigid. She backed away, shaking her head, her eyes wide with a sudden, fresh terror. "No," she whispered. No." She would not go near it. That was the price. That was the $100. Thorn watched her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. He saw her terror, her absolute, bone-deep refusal. He did not argue. He did not press her. He seemed to understand in an instant. He merely nodded. "All right." He turned away from her, giving her his back. He took his own bedroll from a hook on the wall. He unrolled it on the floor, on the other side of the room, as far from the hearth and from her as he could get. Rosalie watched him. He was making his bed on the cold floor. She looked at the hearth. The stones were warm. It was safe. It was defensible. She slid out of his heavy coat, her body instantly shivering in the thin calico. She folded the coat neatly, a lifetime of habit, and set it on a chair. Then she took her own threadbare blanket, her only possession, walked to the hearth, and curled up on the hard, warm stones. She did not sleep. She lay facing the room, watching the large, still shape of the man in the bedroll across the floor. He did not move. He did not make a sound. She listened to the fire crackle and the wind begin to howl outside, a low, lonely sound. She waited for him to rise, to cross the floor, to claim what he had bought. He never moved. Eventually, the sun rose, and she realized he had been asleep for hours. A day passed, then another. A strange, silent routine established itself. Rosalie would wake first, stiff and sore from the stone floor, but warm. Thorn would already be gone, the cabin empty. She would hear the sharp, rhythmic strike of his axe from the woods. She was afraid to be idle. At the saloon, idleness earned a slap or a starved night. She rose, her movements stiff. She found the broom and swept the floor, just as she had at the spur. She tidied the tins on the shelves. She found a pail and, braving the biting cold, went to the stream he had broken the ice on and fetched water. When he came back inside, his face red from the cold, his arms loaded with firewood, he would find her working. He would just nod, stacking the wood by the hearth. He noticed how she moved. He kept his supplies on a high shelf. When she reached for the coffee tin, she had to stretch, her body pulling tight. The movement sent a sharp pain through her bruised ribs. A gift from Abel. She winced, her breath hissing in. Thorn, who was cleaning his rifle at the table, saw it. He said nothing, but the next morning, the coffee tin, the flour, and the salt were all on the lowest shelf. He moved with a quiet that was unnerving. She was so attuned to the sound of Jasper's boot heel, the warning of his approach, that Thorn's silence kept her on edge. He would be at the table, and she would turn, startled, to find him there, watching her. But he was not watching her body. He was watching her hands, her face. He was reading her. He dropped a log onto the hearth. It landed with a heavy, sudden thud. Rosalie cried out, dropping the plate she was washing. She spun around, her hands flying up to cover her face, her shoulders hunched as she braced for a blow. The cabin was silent. The plate had not broken. Thorn stood perfectly still by the fire. He looked at her, crouched in terror, her hands shielding her face. His own face was grim, the scar on his jaw tight. "It was just the wood," he said, his voice quiet. Rosalie slowly lowered her hands. She was breathing in short, harsh gasps. She felt stupid, ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, turning to retrieve the plate. "Don't be," he said. After that, he made noise. He would clear his throat when he entered the cabin. He would set the logs down gently, one by one. He whistled, a low, tuneless sound. When he mended his tack, he was letting her know where he was. Always. He was making himself predictable. He was making himself safe. On the third day, the sky turned a flat, heavy gray. The wind stopped. An oppressive silence fell over the mountain. "Snow's coming," Thorn said. He spent the day securing the lean-to and banking firewood against the cabin's outer wall. That night, it began. It was not a gentle snow. It was a howling, white blizzard. The wind shrieked, rattling the single window. Snow drove against the door in furious, hissing drifts. For 3 days, the world disappeared. They were trapped, 2 people in one small room, floating in a sea of white noise. The confinement was agonizing for Rosalie. The cabin, once a shelter, began to feel small, like her storage room. Thorn, silent and large, seemed to fill the space. He seemed to sense her growing panic. He kept to his side of the room, giving her the hearth and the table. He took out a block of soft pine wood and a small, sharp knife. He sat in his chair, his back to her, and began to whittle. Rosalie watched him. She watched the knife. It was the same knife he used to skin the rabbits he caught in his snares. It was a tool, but it was also a weapon. She watched his hands, strong and scarred, control the blade. He was not hacking at the wood. He was shaving it, peeling away thin, fragrant curls of pine. He was gentle. He was the man who had broken Abel's face with one punch. He was the man who had terrified Jasper Dunn. And he was the man who sat by the fire, moving his hands with quiet, patient grace, carving a piece of wood. The contradiction confused her so much it hurt. For a whole day, the only sounds were the howling wind and the soft shh of his knife on the wood. The silence finally became too much. She had to know. Why? Her voice was hoarse, rusty from disuse. Thorne's hands stilled. He did not turn around. Why what? Why did you do it? She asked, her voice stronger. That money. It was $100. No one has $100. Why did you spend it? On me. He set the knife and the wood on the table. He turned in his chair to face her. His gray eyes were dark, his face shadowed by the stormlight. He looked at the fire, not at her, as if gathering his words from the flames. Before the war, he began, his voice a low rumble. I lived back in Missouri. I was young. I thought I knew everything. He paused. There was a woman. Her name was Eliza. Her husband. He was not a good man. He drank. He hurt her. Rosalie's hands tightened in her lap. She asked me for help, Thorne said, his voice flat. She wanted to leave him. She wanted me to take her away. And I told her it was not my fight. It was between her and her husband. I told her I couldn't get involved. He picked up a stray wood shaving, twisting it in his fingers. I was a coward. I walked away. I left town the next day to join the army. He was silent for a long time. The wind moaned in the chimney. I found out, a year later, he beat her one night. He beat her until she died, and I was 1,000 miles away. He crushed the wood shaving in his fist. I came back from the war. I had seen things, done things. He touched the scar on his jaw. I built this cabin to be away from people, to be quiet, but I made a promise. I don't walk away anymore. He finally looked at her. His gaze was steady, heavy. When I saw him, what he was, I saw Eliza, and I was not going to walk away. Rosalie stared at him. It was not the answer she had expected. She did not know what she had thought, that he wanted her, that he saw something special in her, but it was not about her at all. It was about Eliza. She was a ghost. She was a chance for him to fix a mistake that was 20 years old. The realization settled in her stomach like a cold stone. She was not a person. She was a redemption, and the price was still to be paid. The storm raged. That night, the cabin was colder. The silence was heavier. He had confessed his sin, and she was the living, breathing proof of his penance. She huddled by the hearth, but she could not get warm. The fear, which had receded, came flooding back. If she was just a symbol, an act of atonement, she was still a purchase. The debt was still hers, just transferred to a new owner. She began to tremble. It started in her hands and spread, a violent, uncontrollable shaking. "What do you want?" she whispered. Thorne looked up from his bedroll. "What?" She stood up, her small body vibrating with a terror so profound it had become a kind of rage. "What do you want from me? To earn my keep?" The word came out as a snarl, a word Jasper had used. "The food, the fire, the $100. Is it now? Is this the night I pay for it?" She was crying, but the tears were hot and angry. "Is that what I am? Am I supposed to come to your bed now? Is that the price? Just tell me. It is better than this waiting." She was sobbing, the words tearing out of her throat. All the fear, the humiliation, the months of being an object. It all broke open. Thorne stood up from his bedroll. He was not a shadow. He was a large, stunned man. He looked at her, and his face was not hard. It was hurt. A deep, profound hurt that took her breath away. "You think," he started, his voice rough with disbelief. "You think I am Jasper Dunn? You think that's why you are here?" He took a step toward her, and she flinched back, but he stopped. He ran a hand through his hair, his body tight with an emotion she could not name. "You think I bought you For that, he looked at her small, terrified form, at her tear-streaked face. His own eyes were bright, his voice cracking with a sudden, raw feeling. "Rosalie, you are not here to be used." He said it like a vow. He took a slow breath, trying to calm himself. "You're safe now." The words, they were not an absolution. They were a statement. "You're safe now." She stared at him, the sobs catching in her throat, turning into choked, hiccuping breaths. He was not angry. He was wounded. Wounded that she could think. The tension in her body did not release. It shattered. A wave of exhaustion so profound it buckled her knees washed over her. She swayed. He moved then. He grabbed the chair from the table and pushed it behind her. "Sit." She sat. He moved to the hearth, stoked the fire, and busied himself making coffee, his back to her, giving her privacy to regain her composure. "The bed is warm," he said quietly, not looking at her. "It is just a bed. It is for sleeping. You sleep there. I will take the floor. You are safe." She looked at the narrow cot, piled with soft furs. It was not a trap. It was not a stage. It was not a place of payment. It was just a bed. Slowly, her limbs heavy as lead, she stood. She walked to the bed. She pulled back the furs and slid in, her thin dress and all. The warmth enveloped her, the softness a shock after the hard floor. She was asleep before he turned around, but the sleep was not peaceful. She was back in the gilded spur. Abel's hands were on her, his whiskey breath hot on her face. Jasper was laughing, and the miners were shouting, "Dance, dance!" She was turning, but her feet were stuck in mud, and she could not breathe. "No, no, please don't touch me!" She woke up screaming, lashing out, her hands hitting the cabin's log wall. "Rosalie!" Thorne was there. He was sitting in the chair, right beside the bed. He was not touching her. He was just a solid, present shape in the dim firelight. "You're here," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble. "You're in the cabin. You are safe. It was just a dream." She was panting, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She looked at him, his scarred face illuminated by the fire. He was her guardian. He was just there. He's gone, Thorne said. "He can't touch you here. No one can." He sat with her. He did not say, "Go back to sleep." He just sat, a silent watchman. As the storm raged outside and the fire burned low, he sat there until her breathing evened out, until her eyes finally closed, and the sun came up, pale and weak, on a new, white world. The storm broke. The world was remade, buried under 3 feet of clean, silent snow. The sky was a sharp, brilliant blue. A new quiet settled between them. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of 2 people learning a new language. He took her nightmares in stride. He sat with her, night after night, until she woke whimpering instead of screaming. He finished his whittling. One afternoon, after they had shared a simple meal of rabbit stew, he slid the small object across the table. It was a bird, a small, perfect pine bird, its wings half spread, as if about to take flight. She picked it up. Her fingers, chapped and rough, traced the smooth wood. It was the first beautiful thing she had held in a year. That night, she could not sleep, but it was not from fear. The cabin was warm. Thorne was asleep in his bedroll. She felt restless. She rose from the bed. She looked at Thorne. He was still. She walked to the door and pulled it open. The air that hit her was so cold it was like a slap. But it was pure. It smelled of nothing but snow and pine. The world was awash in blue light from a full, bright moon. The snow was a glittering, untouched blanket. She looked down at her bare feet. She stepped out onto the porch. She stepped off the porch, into the deep, powdery snow. The cold was a shock, a pain so sharp it made her gasp. But it was real. It cut through the numbness. She stood in the center of the clearing, bathed in moonlight. She looked up at the sky, at the millions of stars. She was alone. No, she was not. Thorn was in the cabin, but no one was watching her. No one was demanding. She lifted her arms. She remembered her mother. Grace comes from inside. She raised one foot, balancing in the snow. She held the pose, her muscles screaming, her body trembling with cold and effort. Then, slowly, she began to move. It was not a performance. It was a prayer. A slow porte de bras, her arms sweeping up to the moon. A painful, rusty arabesque, her leg lifting behind her. It was awkward. Her muscles were weak, her joints stiff, but it was hers. She was dancing for the snow, for the stars, for the silence. She was dancing for the small, bruised part of her that had not died in the gilded spur. She was dancing for herself. She twirled, her bare feet kicking up powder, and she stopped, breathless, her heart pounding, her skin alive with the cold. She saw him. He was standing in the open doorway of the cabin, a dark silhouette against the warm light. He was watching her. Rosalie froze. Shame and fear washed over her. He had seen her. He would think she was a fool. He did not move. He just watched her, his arms folded, the silence of the clearing stretched. "Now that's a dance," he murmured, his voice so low it was almost carried away by the breeze. She stared at him. He was not mocking her. His voice was soft, laced with something like wonder. She was shivering, her feet numb. She walked back toward the cabin. Across the snow she had marked with her own steps. She walked past him, into the warmth. He had the tin coffee mug he always used. He had poured her a cup of the hot, bitter coffee. He held it out to her. She reached for it, her hands shaking violently. Their fingers brushed. His hand was large, rough, and warm. Her immediate instinct, burned into her by months of abuse, was to recoil, to pull away from any touch. But she did not. She let her fingers rest against his for a heartbeat. It was just warmth. It was not a grab. It was not a demand. It was just a hand, holding a cup. She took the mug. Their eyes met. "Thank you," she whispered. Thorn just nodded, his gaze steady, and quietly pushed the cabin door shut, closing out the cold. The mountain did not release its grip on winter all at once. It let go slowly, one drop of water at a time. The first sign was the sound. For months, the cabin had been wrapped in the muffled silence of snow. Now, a persistent dripping began, a tapping at the eaves as the sun gained strength. Icicles, which had hung from the porch roof like crystal teeth, thinned and crashed to the ground. The deep, heavy quiet was replaced by the rush of water, the gurgle of the stream breaking free from its prison of ice. Rosalie felt the change inside her as much as she saw it outside. The cold, hard knot of terror that had lived in her stomach for a year began to soften, to thaw. She had survived. She had survived the saloon, and she had survived the winter. She had survived the man who bought her, who, it turned in, had not bought her at all. He had freed her. She began to move about the cabin with a new purpose. She was no longer just cleaning to earn her keep, no longer sweeping to appease a master. She was tending to a home. She found a tattered bolt of faded blue calico in a supply crate Thorn had hauled up from the town. It was meant for mending feed sacks. Rosalie claimed it. She spent 3 days measuring, cutting, and sewing by hand, her fingers stiff and clumsy with the needle. Thorn sat at the table, mending his tack, the scent of leather and oil filling the small room. He watched her. He watched her brow furrow in concentration, her tongue caught between her teeth. He watched her hold the fabric up to the dirty window, her head tilted, imagining. When she was finished, she hung the 2 simple, hemmed squares of fabric. They were not perfect. The stitches were uneven, but they were curtains. They softened the harsh light, turning the single room from a bare shelter into something gentle. Rosalie stepped back, her hands on her hips, and for the first time since her mother had died, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. Thorn saw it. It was like watching the first wildflower pushed through the snow. "It's good," he said, his voice a low rumble, "brings the sky inside." She began to hum. She did not know she was doing it. It was a tune from a lifetime ago. A simple piece from a ballet class. She was washing their 2 plates in the basin, her back to him, and the low, absent sound drifted into the air. Thorne's hands, which were rubbing oil into a bridle, stilled. He listened. It was the sound of a woman who was not afraid. It was the sound of a life returning. He did not speak, did not move, for fear of startling her, for fear of silencing the small, brave sound. The world outside was opening up. The snow receded, revealing the damp, rich earth. Green shoots, vibrant and fierce, pushed up through the mud. Rosalie, wrapped in Thorne's oversized coat, began to explore. She foraged for the wild onions and bitter greens that Thorne pointed out, her eyes sharp, her movements quick. She was claiming the mountain, just as she had claimed the cabin. "You'll need to ride," he announced one morning. "If you're to be safe here, you need to be able to get away, or get for help. I'll teach you." The horse, a tall roan named Buck, terrified her. It was huge, powerful, a reminder of her own frailty. But Thorne's patience was endless. "He knows you're scared," he said, standing by her side, his hand on the horse's neck. "They feel it, just like you felt Jasper's anger. Just stand. Let him smell you." She stood for an hour, her body rigid, while the horse simply watched her, breathing softly. The next day, Thorne had her lead him. The day after, he held the bridle while she sat, perched high and stiff, in the saddle. "He's just a horse," Thorne said, his voice calm. "He wants to know who is in charge. Be gentle, but be firm. Show him you mean it." He was teaching her about the horse, but he was teaching her about herself. He was showing her that she, small and broken as she felt, could control something so large. He watched her, a small, proud light in his eyes, as she finally took the reins herself and guided the horse in a wobbly circle around the clearing. He was watching her with an affection that was so deep it ached, but his hands remained at his sides. His restraint was a fortress, built to protect her, but also to protect himself. The river was running high, swollen with melted snow, churning and brown. "Good day for fishing," Thorne said. "The water's stirred up. They'll be biting." He was teaching her to cast a line, his hand over hers on the simple willow pole, showing her the flick of the wrist. She was clumsy, her line tangling in the overhanging branches. "Like this," he said, his voice low by her ear. "Easy. Let the line do the work." She tried again, and this time she laughed. It was a real laugh, a sudden, bright sound that startled them both. She had stumbled on a slick, mossy rock, and the line had sailed perfectly, landing in the one spot she had not been aiming for. I did it," she laughed, turning to him. The laugh died as she turned. Her foot slipped on the moss. She pinwheeled, her arms flailing, and a small cry escaped her. She reached for him. Thorne grabbed her hand, but her momentum was too much. He was pulled off balance, with a great splash that sent a flock of birds screaming from the trees. They both toppled backward into the churning, ice-cold river. The shock of the cold was breathtaking. Rosalie came up sputtering, her hair plastered to her face, the water sucking at her dress. Thorne surfaced beside her, shaking his head like a great bear, his hat floating downstream. The river was only waist-deep where they had fallen, but the current was strong. He grabbed her arm. His grip sure. "You all right?" She looked at him. His dark hair was slicked to his head. His wool shirt was plastered to his chest, outlining the hard muscles of his shoulders and arms. He was not the scarred, distant stranger. He was a man, soaked to the skin, looking at her with wide, concerned eyes. She nodded, pushing her wet hair from her face, and then she laughed again. It was not the small, bright sound from before. It was a full, deep belly laugh, a sound of pure, absurd joy. He stared at her, stunned, and then, slowly, a smile cracked his own stern face. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. It transformed him, erasing the scars and the sadness, making him look years younger. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. They stood there for a moment, two fools in a freezing river, laughing. The cold began to bite. "We need to get out," he said, his smile fading into concern. He guided her to the bank, his hand firm on her back, pushing her up onto the muddy shore. He climbed out after her. The sun was warm, but the air was cool. Rosalie's thin calico dress, the one she had sewn from scraps, was useless. It clung to her, molding every line of her body. Her thin legs, her small waist, the curve of her breasts. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly, painfully aware of him, of herself. Thorne turned his back. He did not hesitate. He simply turned, giving her his back, shielding her from his own gaze. He looked out over the river, his own shirt dripping, his shoulders set. Your hat," Rosalie stammered, pointing. "It'll find the valley before I do," he said, still not looking at her. "We need to get you back. You'll catch your death." She looked at his back. It was a wall. It was a protection. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, clad only in a wet dress that was no better than skin, and he had looked away. He had given her dignity. Jasper would have stared. Jasper would have laughed, his eyes crawling over her. The terror she had lived with for so long was gone. It was not just dormant. It was gone. She took a step toward him. He did not move. She reached out a trembling hand. She laid it, flat, on the center of his broad, wet back. He flinched, his entire body going rigid, as if her touch were a brand. But he did not pull away. "Rosalie," he said, his voice thick, a warning. "You don't frighten me," she whispered. He turned, slowly. His face was anguished. His gray eyes were dark, swirling with a storm of emotions she could not read, affection, longing, and a profound, bone-deep restraint. "I should," he said, his voice barely audible. "After what you've seen, what men are, you are not them," she said. She did not move her hand. She slid it from his back, around to his chest. She could feel the steady, heavy beat of his heart under her palm. She looked up into his face. She saw the scar, the lines of hardship, and the deep, gentle soul behind them. "You are not Jasper," she said, her voice soft, but full of a new, hard certainty. "And you are not my stepfather. You are just Thorne." He looked down at her hand, resting on his chest. He covered it with his own, his large, rough hand enveloping hers. I don't know how to be," he started, his voice rough. "Around you, I know," she whispered. He leaned down, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss. It was a question. It was a breath. It was tentative, soft, chapped lips against hers. She felt the tremor in his hand. He was afraid of hurting her, of frightening her. That knowledge, that he was afraid for her, broke the last wall inside her. She rose on her toes. She pressed her mouth to his. She put her other hand on his shoulder, and she kissed him. It was tentative for only a second. Then the hunger, the long-repressed longing of two lonely, wounded souls, took over. It was a floodgate breaking. It was the thaw, the river, the spring, all happening at once. His arms went around her, pulling her against his hard, wet body, and his mouth opened against hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hungry, desperate, and raw. It was a kiss of survival. A kiss that said, "I am alive, and you're alive." He tasted of the river, of coffee, of a loneliness as vast as his own. He was the one who broke it. He tore his mouth from hers, resting his forehead against hers, breathing in harsh, ragged gasps. His eyes were closed, his face tight with a painful, warring self-control. "Rosalie?" he breathed, his voice broken. "We can't. Not like this. Not yet." He was right. They were soaked, shivering, standing in the mud. And it was too fast, too sudden. She nodded, her own breathing unsteady. She did not feel rejected. She felt seen. He had stopped, not for himself, but for her. "Let's go home," she whispered. The air between them changed. The walk back to the cabin was silent, but it was not the silence of strangers. It was a heavy, charged, electric silence. They built up the fire, and Rosalie changed into her only other dress behind a blanket he held up for her, while he changed his own clothes with his back turned. They did not touch. They did not talk about it, but they could no longer be in the same room without being aware of each other. Every brush of his hand as he passed her a plate, every time their eyes met across the table, the memory of that kiss was there, throbbing in the air between them. The intimacy they had found by the river needed a voice. That night, sitting by the fire, she finally spoke. "I used to dream," she said, her voice quiet, "that I would dance in Paris. My mother, she was French. She loved the ballet. She said I had a gift. She said I was made of air and music." Thorne sat on his stool, listening, his hands clasped between his knees. When she died, the music stopped. My stepfather, he never saw me. He just saw what I was worth, what he could get for me. She traced the grain of the wooden floor with her bare toe. At the saloon, Jasper, he wanted me to be a thing, a painted doll for his customers. He hated that I had been. "You were a lady," Thorne said, his voice soft, "and he hated you for it. He wanted to break that," she whispered. "He wanted me to be as dirty as his floor, and after a while, I started to believe him. I would look in the mirror, what little piece I had, and I didn't see me. I saw his property. I saw a thing to be used. I stopped believing I was real. I thought I was already dead." She looked at him, her eyes clear, though bright with unshed tears. You were the first person who looked at me and saw a person. That note, it was like you threw me a rope. Even if you were buying me, you looked at me like I was still alive." Thorne's face was a mask of grief, not for himself, but for her. "I am not a good man, Rosalie," he said, his voice rough. "I came here to hide. The war, it taught me how to kill, and I learned I was good at it." He looked at his own hands. "I've killed men. I've seen things that would turn your stomach. I fought to free men, and I became a monster to do it. When I came back, I couldn't be around people. I couldn't stand their talk, their peace. They hadn't seen it. They didn't know." He touched the scar on his jaw. This was from a man I killed. He marked me, and I am marked inside. Too, I built this cabin to keep the world away, to keep me away from the world. I thought I was just as dead as you did." He looked at her, his gray eyes piercing. "And then I saw you, and you were the only other person in the world who looked as dead as I felt." The confession hung in the air. They were not a hero and a damsel. They were two survivors, two ghosts, clinging to the same small scrap of land. The intimacy that followed was not a spark. It was a slow, deep, powerful current. They talked for days. They shared their pasts, laying their wounds bare in the safety of the small, warm room. One night, they sat side by side at the table, sharing a late supper of bread and beans. The cabin was quiet, the fire burning low. He reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough, but his touch was impossibly gentle. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. He did not move his hand, but let it rest on her cheek. She turned her head and kissed his palm. His breath hitched. She stood up. She walked to him and stood between his knees. She took his hands, his large, scarred, killer's hands, and placed them on her waist. "I am not Eliza," she whispered, looking into his eyes, "and I am not your ghost. I am Rosalie." "I know," he breathed, his thumbs stroking her hips. She leaned down and kissed him. It was not the hungry, desperate kiss of the river. It was slow and deep and full of knowing. "I want something that's mine," she whispered against his lips. "This, with you, I want to choose it. I want to be real again. With you." He understood. This was not payment. This was her, claiming her body, her choice, her life. He stood, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. He carried her to the narrow bed, the one she had feared, the one that was now hers. He laid her down on the soft furs. He did not rush. He undid the simple buttons of her dress, his hands shaking, his eyes never leaving hers, asking permission with every touch. She watched him, her heart pounding, but she was not afraid. He was slow. He was tender. He worshipped her with his hands, his mouth. He unraveled all the knots of pain Jasper had tied. He reclaimed her, for herself. He showed her that her body was not a tool for humiliation, but a source of profound, shuddering pleasure. When he finally entered her, it was a joining, a healing. It was so emotional, so raw, that it was almost painful. But it was the pain of a bone being set, of a wound being cleaned. After, she lay tangled in his arms, his body a warm, solid weight against her, and she wept. She wept for the girl she had been, for the woman she had lost, and for the woman she was becoming. They were not tears of pain or fear. They were tears of care. She was weeping because she had been treated as something precious, and the kindness of it, the simple, tender care, was more than she could bear. He just held her. He stroked her hair, his rough palm on her back, and let her cry. "It's all right," he murmured, over and over. "You're safe. It's all right." The next morning, Rosalie woke first. Thorn was still asleep, his arms slung protectively over her waist. She had never felt so safe. She slid from the bed, wrapping a blanket around her naked body. The sun was pouring through the little blue curtains she had made, filling the cabin with a bright, clean light. She pushed open the door. The air was warm, smelling of damp earth and new pine. She dropped the blanket. She stepped out onto the porch, into the sunlight, her skin tingling. She was free. She began to dance, barefoot, her hair unbound and wild down her back. She moved. This was not the stiff, broken dance of the saloon. This was not the tentative, painful dance in the snow. This was joy. It was fluid and strong and free. She spun, her arms wide, her head thrown back, her face turned to the sun. She was air. She was music. Thorn woke to the empty bed. He grabbed his trousers and came to the door, his heart in his throat. He stopped, mesmerized. She was in the clearing, a vision in the golden light, dancing only for herself, her body strong and graceful. She was the most beautiful thing he had not known existed. He watched, his heart so full he thought it might break, his eyes wet. She finished, her chest heaving, a radiant smile on her face. She saw him. She did not cover herself. She just smiled. He walked to her, his own heart in his eyes. He stood before her. "You'll only dance for joy now," he said, his voice thick. She stepped into his arms, pressing her face against his warm, bare chest. "Only for you." She smiled. The future, once a black, featureless wall, had begun to show cracks of light. It started in the quiet moments after they had made love, their bodies tangled in the furs, the cabin silent and warm. It started at the table, when his knee would press against hers. A simple, solid contact that meant you are here. I am here. "What will you do?" she asked him one evening, her voice soft in the firelight. She was mending his shirt, the needle moving with a new, steady confidence. "When the traps are all set and the wood is all chopped, what do you do for the rest of the year?" Thorn was sharpening his axe, the whetstone making a rhythmic, scraping sound. He paused. "There is no rest of the year. The mountain always needs something. Mending the roof, clearing the trail. Hunting. It's a full-time life. But is it the only life?" She pressed gently. She looked at her own hands. They were chapped and strong, but she remembered what they had been trained for. I think I would like to teach." He stopped his work. "Teach? Dancing. Not for a saloon, for children, for joy. Like you said. The way my mother taught me. A small, hesitant idea, born in the safety of the cabin, was finally brave enough to be spoken. There are small towns, In the valleys. You said so. Places with families. Children need music. They need grace. Thorn set the axe and stone aside. He looked at her, his face serious. He had come to this mountain to escape the world, to escape towns and families and the noise of life. And now, life had come to him. He was not just a man in a cabin anymore. He was a man with Rosalie. A studio, she said, her eyes brightening with the vision. It wouldn't have to be grand, just a room with a smooth floor, maybe a small piano. If we could find one, I could teach them. I could make something beautiful again. He saw the hope in her face. He saw the woman she had been, the woman she was becoming, and he knew his life of pure isolation was over. It was not a sad thought. It was terrifying, and it was wonderful. A studio, he repeated, testing the word, with a smooth floor. He nodded, slowly. That sounds good. Rosalie, that sounds right. The plan took root. They talked for days, their voices low and excited, planning a life neither had thought possible a month ago. They would not stay on this high, lonely peak forever. They would build something together, down in the world. The valley, south of here, he said, tapping his finger on a map he'd sketched on the table. There's a town, Sutter's Mill. It's small, quiet, but it's growing. Families are moving in. Is there land? She asked. I'll go see, he said. I'll ride down, see the registrar, ask about any open parcels. Maybe find a place by the river, a place for a real home. Our home, she whispered, and the word felt solid. Real. The morning he left, the air was heavy with an apprehension they both tried to ignore. It was the first time they would be separated since the river. You'll be all right, he asked, standing by his horse. He had his rifle, his bedroll, and a small sack of food. I will, she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. She had been safe here for so long that the idea of him leaving, even for a day, made the old, familiar fear prickle at her neck. I have the axe. I have the door. He did not smile. He just nodded. I will be back by tomorrow. Sundown. I'll ride hard. You bolt the door tonight. Do not open it for any sound. Do you hear me? Any sound. I hear you, she said. He leaned down from the saddle. He did not kiss her. It was too much. A goodbye. He just touched her cheek with his rough fingers. Be safe. You too, she whispered. He turned the roan's head and rode down the trail, the pack mule following. Rosalie stood and watched until the sound of the hoofbeats faded, until he was swallowed by the deep green of the pines. The cabin was too quiet. The silence, once a comfort, was now a hollow, empty thing. Thorn's absence filled the room. She tried to busy herself. She swept the floor, which was already clean. She tidied the shelves, which were already tidy. She went outside to the woodpile, deciding to split the kindling herself. She was by the river, washing the luncheon dishes, when she heard the horses. It was not one horse, like Thorn's. It was several, and they were moving with a careless, loud confidence, not the careful tread of her protector. Rosalie froze. Her heart, which had learned to beat at a steady, calm rhythm, slammed against her ribs. She heard a man laugh, a thick, ugly sound that did not belong on her mountain. This is it, a voice called out. This is the place. I see the smoke. She dropped the plate. It sank into the mud of the riverbank. She did not run. She crouched behind the large boulder where she sat, peering through the willow branches. 3 men rode into the clearing. She did not recognize them at first. They were not able, but they had the same look. They were hard, dirty men, wearing the cheap suits and flat-brimmed hats of town thugs. They reined in their horses, looking at the cabin with greedy, assessing eyes. He ain't here, one of them said. A thin, weasel-faced man. Boone, check the lean-to, the third man ordered. He was older, with a gray-streaked beard. He seemed to be the leader, the large man. Boone dismounted and lumbered to the lean-to. 1 horse is gone. Mule, too. He's on the trail, just like Jasper said he would be. Jasper. The name was a white-hot poker in Rosalie's stomach. She felt the blood drain from her face, her knees turning to water. Jasper. They were Jasper's men. "Well, where's the girl?" the weasel-faced man asked, spitting a stream of tobacco onto the ground. "Jasper said the cowboy took his girl. He'll pay double if we bring her back. We'll find her," the leader said. He dismounted, his eyes scanning the clearing. He saw the small, neat pile of kindling. He saw the axe resting against the chopping block. "She ain't far. Spread out. Finch, you check the cabin. Boone, you check the woods. I'll check the river." Rosalie's mind screamed. "Run! Hide! Run!" The leader started toward the riverbank. She could see his boots, his spurs. He was 10 yards away. She backed away, slowly, silently, her bare feet sinking into the mud. She stayed low. He was humming, a tuneless, awful sound. He reached the spot where she had been. "Well, well," he said, his voice casual. He picked up the tin cup she had left. "Still warm. She's right here. Boys, flush her out." Rosalie bolted. She scrambled up the muddy bank. Slipping and falling to her knees, she pushed herself up and ran, not toward the cabin, but toward the deep woods, the path of the river. "There!" the leader roared. "There she is! Get her!" She heard them crash after her, one on foot, the leader, and the other two, Finch and Boone, scrambling for their horses. She was fast, her body lean and strengthened by months of mountain life. But she was terrified. She ran, her lungs burning, the branches whipping her face and arms. She made it to the edge of the clearing, back to the cabin. She had a desperate, wild idea. The axe. She veered, running for the chopping block. Finch, the weasel-faced man, was already there. Having run from the cabin, he saw her, and his face split in a greasy smile. He lunged for her. Rosalie did not scream. She grabbed the first thing she could, a heavy, cast-iron skillet left by the fire pit. Finch grabbed her arm. "Not so fast, little bird. Jasper's." She swung the skillet with all the force of her terror. It connected with the side of his head with a sickening, wet crack. He grunted, his eyes wide with shock, and he went down, his hand flying to his temple. Rosalie did not wait. She dropped the skillet and ran. She ran straight into the woods, up the trail, away from the cabin, away from the men. She just ran, her breath sobbing in her chest. She heard the leader shout, "She got Finch! Get on the horses, you fools! She's getting away!" A shot rang out. A bullet snapped through the leaves just over her head. Rosalie screamed then, a high, thin sound of pure animal terror, and plunged deeper into the forest, away from the trail, scrambling over rocks and fallen logs. Thorne rode up the trail, his heart light. He had the papers. 20 acres, down in the Suitors Mill Valley. A good parcel, with river access. He had even bought a small bag of peppermint candies at the general store. He smiled, thinking of Rosalie's face when she tasted them. He rounded the last bend, his eyes on the cabin. The smile vanished. The door was open. His hand went to the rifle in its scabbard. He stopped the horse, his body going instantly, terribly still. He listened. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no sound of Rosalie humming. He dismounted, pulling the rifle, his movements fluid and silent. He walked, low and fast, to the side of the cabin. He saw the skillet first, lying in the dirt. Then he saw the blood, a dark, ugly splash of it on the porch step, and more on the ground near the chopping block. A man's hat, a flat-brimmed, cheap hat, lay near it. "Rosalie?" he called, his voice tight. No answer. He moved to the front. He saw the tracks. 3 horses, shod, town horses. He saw the churned-up mud where they had turned, the deep gouges where one had been spurred. He saw her tracks, small and bare, running from the river. He saw the tracks of a man. He saw where Finch had fallen. He saw her footprints, digging deep into the earth, fleeing into the woods. And he saw the other tracks, 2 sets of boots, one on horseback, following her. A rage, cold and black and absolute, rose in him. The world narrowed. The peaceful man who had bought candies was gone. The soldier was back. He did not call for her. He did not want them to know he was here. He checked his rifle, chambered a round, and began to run. He did not follow the trail. He followed the signs, a broken branch, a scuff of mud on a rock. He moved with a terrifying speed and silence, his eyes reading the story of the chase. They were clumsy. These men, they were loud. They were city thugs. He was a hunter. Rosalie had been running for what felt like hours. Her lungs were on fire. Her legs were jelly. She had lost her pursuers twice, only to hear them crash through the underbrush, yelling to each other. "Find her! Boone! Jasper'll skin us if we lose her. I see her. She's up the ridge." She had scrambled into a deep, rocky crevice, a place where a stream had cut through the granite. She followed it, her feet numb, until she found it, a huge, ancient pine, felled by lightning years ago, its trunk hollowed out by time and rot. It was a black, damp hole. She crawled inside, her body shaking so hard she could barely move. She wriggled as far back as she could, into the darkness, her dress snagging on the rough wood. She lay there, panting, trying to make herself small, trying to stop breathing, and she waited. She heard them. They were close, so close. "Where'd the little rabbit go?" It was Boone's voice, thick and angry. "She came this way," said the leader. "I saw her. Check that log." Rosalie's heart stopped. She put her hand over her mouth, biting down on her own knuckles to keep from screaming. She felt a hand reach into her dress pocket. Her fingers closed around a small, hard object. The wooden bird, the one Thorn had carved for her. She clutched it. She held on to it, the smooth, worn pine, the symbol of his gentleness. She squeezed it so hard she thought it might break. A boot kicked the outside of the log. "It's empty. Just spiders. Come on, she can't have gone far." "What about Finch?" "He's fine." She just rang his bell. "He's back at the cabin, holding his head. He'll live, but she's gonna pay for that. Jasper will have his fun, and then I'll have mine." The voices moved away, back down the ridge. Rosalie did not move. She lay in the dark, damp log, clutching the bird, her body locked in a rictus of terror. She stayed there for hours, long after the woods had gone silent. Thorn found Finch first. He had circled back to the cabin, moving like a ghost. The weasel-faced man was sitting on the porch, holding a bloody rag to his head, his horse tied nearby. Thorn stepped out of the trees. "Where are they?" Finch looked up, his eyes wide with terror. He had never seen this man, but he knew who he was. He scrambled for the pistol on his belt. He was too slow. Thorn crossed the 10 yards in 3 bounds, kicked the pistol from his hand, and grabbed him by the front of his shirt, lifting him clear off the porch. "I will ask you one time," Thorn said, his voice a low, lethal whisper, his face inches from Finch's. "Where did they go?" They went up the ridge." Finch stammered. "Following the girl. I don't know." Thorn hit him. It was the same punch he had used on Abel, but harder. Finch's head snapped back, and he went limp, unconscious. Thorn dropped him like a feed sack. He did not check to see if he was breathing. He did not care. He went up the ridge. He found them at the crevice. They were casting about, frustrated, angry. "She's gone," Boone said, kicking a rock. "Vanished. Like a damn ghost." "She's here," the leader said. "She's just hiding. We'll wait. She'll have to come out." "You wait," a new voice said. Boone and the leader spun around. Thorn stood 20 yards away, at the mouth of the crevice. He had his rifle, and it was leveled at the leader's chest. "You," the leader spat, his hand moving to his own holster. "Don't," Thorn said. The leader's hand froze. He saw the man's eyes. They were not the eyes of a cowboy. They were the eyes of a killer. "We just want the girl," the leader said, trying to sound reasonable. "She's property of Mr. Dunn. We got a writ." "You've got nothing," Thorn said. "You're on my land, and you are hunting my wife." "Wife?" Boone laughed, a short, stupid sound. "She's a—" Thorne shot him. He did not aim for the leader. He shifted his aim 1 inch and shot Boone. The rifle's blast was deafening in the narrow space. The bullet took Boone high in the chest, spinning him around and slamming him against the rock wall. He slid to the ground, his eyes wide with a final, terminal surprise. The leader stared at his fallen man, his mouth open. Thorne chambered another round. The shuck click was the loudest sound in the world. He leveled the rifle at the leader's head. "You have 2 choices," Thorne said, his voice flat and cold. "You can die here, or you can get on your horse, get your other man, and ride back to Jasper Dunn. You will tell him. You will tell him if he ever sends anyone, if he ever says her name again. I will come down from this mountain, and I will burn his saloon to the ground. And I will not wait for him to be out of it." The leader was shaking. He had seen a man killed without a blink. You're a dead man," he stammered. "Maybe," Thorne said. "But not today, and not by you. Now go." The leader did not hesitate. He scrambled back, slipping on the rocks, and ran, crashing through the trees toward the cabin and his horse. Thorne did not lower the rifle until the sound of his flight was gone. He stood, his body trembling with the adrenaline of the kill, his ears ringing. "Rosalie," he called, his voice rough. "Rosalie, it's me. You're safe." He heard a sound, a small, desperate scrabbling. From the hollow log, he ran to it. "Rosalie!" She was stuck. Her dress was caught. She was crying, a high, panicked sound. "I'm here," he said, his voice breaking. He reached into the dark hole, his hands finding her. He pulled. The fabric ripped, and she came free, tumbling out into his arms, covered in mud and rot, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. She was clutching the small wooden bird. "Thorne," she sobbed, clutching his shirt. "Thorne, Thorne." "I have you," he said, his arms crushing her to him. "I have you. You're safe. I have you." He carried her back. He did not walk. He ran, holding her to his chest, his rifle in one hand. He passed the body of Boone without a glance. He got to the cabin. Finch was gone. The leader had taken him. Their horses were gone. Thorne kicked the door shut. He laid Rosalie on the bed, her bed, and piled every fur, every blanket, on top of her. He built the fire up until it was a roaring furnace. But she could not get warm. She was shaking, her eyes wide and blank, staring at a place he could not see. He sat with her all night. He held her hand. He bathed her face, where the branches had cut her. He told her she was safe, over and over, a litany. Just before dawn, she finally spoke. Her voice was a dry, terrible whisper. "Don't!" she pleaded, her eyes finding his, full of a terror so deep it was bottomless. "Don't let them take me, Thorne. Please, don't let them take me back. I'd rather die. I swear to you, I'd rather be dead." He looked at her, this small, brave woman who had been brought back to life, only to be dragged back to the edge of the grave. He gathered her up, blankets and all, and held her in his lap, rocking her like a child. "Listen to me," he whispered, his own voice hoarse, his cheek against her hair. No one will ever touch you again. I promise you. I swear it on my life. No one will ever harm you again," she cried. Then, a deep, retching, painful sound, and he held her until the sun came up. The next morning, he was outside, gathering their few, precious things. The coffee pot, his axe, her 2 dresses, the tin plates. "What are you doing?" she asked. She was standing in the doorway, pale and wrapped in a blanket. "We're leaving," he said. He did not look at her. He was piling firewood inside the cabin. He was splashing oil from the lamp onto the curtains. Her curtains. "What? This place is not safe," he said, his voice hard. "They found it. They know. They will come back, or others will." He looked at her, his eyes full of a terrible resolve. "It's not a home. It's a shadow." He took a lit branch from the hearth. He looked around the small room that had been their sanctuary. That had been their world. "We'll build a new one," he said. "We'll build it from the ground up, with our own hands, a place with a smooth floor, and we'll build it where no shadows can reach you." He tossed the branch onto the oil-soaked curtains. They went up in a great, whooshing roar. He took her hand and pulled her outside. They stood on the trail, with the horse and the mule, and they watched it burn. They watched the place where they had healed, the place where they had fallen in love, be consumed by fire, cleansing the wood, the air, the mountain of Jasper Dunn, of the fear, of the past. It was a funeral, and it was a beginning. They rode down from the mountain, away from the column of black smoke that had been their life. Rosalie sat in front of Thorn on the roan, his coat once again wrapped around her. But this time, she did not huddle. She sat straight, her hand resting on his, her gaze fixed forward. The mule, loaded with their few possessions, a coffee pot, an axe, 2 blankets, and a tin of flour, followed patiently. They did not look back. The fire was a cleansing, a brutal, necessary end. The past was ash. The journey down took 2 days. They were a strange, silent pair. Thorn, his face set in grim lines, his rifle gone, his pistol at his hip. Rosalie, her face bruised and scratched from the branches, her eyes wide, but not with terror, with resolve. They were not running from something, they were moving towards something. Sutter's Mill was not a town so much as a promise. It lay in a wide, green valley, cleaved by the same river that had run past their cabin. It was new. The building smelled of freshly sawn pine and sawdust, not stale whiskey and old despair. There was a church, its steeple a white needle against the blue sky. There was a general store, a blacksmith, and a land registrar's office. But most of all, there were houses, small and neat, with fenced-in yards where laundry flapped on lines and children, loud and bright, chased chickens. They stopped at the edge of the main street. Rosalie drank in the sight of it, the noise, the life. It was everything Junction had not been. It's real," she whispered. "It is," Thorn said. He looked at the lumber yard, a great, open-air space piled high with felled trees and stacks of fresh planks. "We start there." He dismounted and helped her down. He did not go to the land office. He did not go to the general store. He walked, his boots sure on the packed earth, straight to the lumber yard. A man with a thick apron and a pencil over his ear looked up. "Help you?" the man asked. "I need lumber." Thorn said, "Nails, a saw, a hammer, everything you need for a small house, 2 rooms." The proprietor, a Mr. Henderson, looked him over. He saw the scarred face, the buckskin, the pistol. "That's a tall order. Got the coin for it?" Thorn unstrapped his last remaining link to his old life. His rifle? It was a fine piece, a heavy Winchester, lovingly cared for. He laid it on the counter. "I don't have coin, but I have this." Henderson's eyes widened. He picked up the rifle, his hands reverent. He checked the action, sighted down the barrel. This is a fine weapon, Mr. Worth more than a pile of wood." "I'm not asking for its worth," Thorn said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "I'm asking for a home." "The lumber, the tools, and a 20-acre parcel you've got listed by the South Meadow." "The old Miller parcel?" Henderson was stunned. "That's all right. You've got a deal." "And," Thorn added, "I need a job. I can build, I can hunt, I can do whatever you need." Henderson looked at the man who had just traded a rifle for a home. He saw the strength in his shoulders, the honesty in his steady gray eyes. "You start tomorrow, 7 o'clock. My new sawmill needs a foreman." Thorn nodded. "Once." "My name is Thorn. Henderson. Welcome to Sutter's Mill, Mr. Thorn." While Thorn worked, turning his strength to building the town, Rosalie found their new life. They lived in a rented room at first, a small, clean space above the general store. But Rosalie could not be still. She watched the town. She watched the children. She saw them, playing loud, clumsy games in the street. She saw the mothers, tired and overworked, trying to manage them. She took a piece of paper, a precious thing, and a charcoal pencil. She wrote, in her elegant Eastern script, "Lessons in Dance and Grace. For children." She did not have a name to put on it, so she simply signed it. "Inquire at the general store. Evenings." She tacked it to the board outside the church. For 3 days, no one came. She felt the old, familiar shame creeping in. She was a fool. These were practical people. They did not have time for grace. On the 4th day, a small, shy girl with bright red pigtails, the blacksmith's daughter, appeared at her door. She was clutching a nickel. "My PA says, are you the dancing lady?" Rosalie's heart ached. "I am," she said gently. "My PA says, I'm clumsy. He says, maybe you can fix it." "You are not clumsy," Rosalie said, kneeling down. "You are just not used to your own strength. Come, we will start tomorrow. On the grass, by the church." The next day, she had 1 student. The day after, 2 more, brave enough to join. Within a week, she had 6. She had no studio. She had a flat patch of grass. She had no piano. She hummed the tunes, simple, soaring melodies her mother had taught her. She had no ballet bar. She used the top rail of the white fence surrounding the churchyard. She taught them to stand tall. "Feel the string," she would say, her voice soft, "pulling you up, up, up to the sky. You are not just girls. You are made of air." She sewed simple costumes for them. She bought a bolt of cheap flour sacking and spent her evenings by candlelight, cutting and stitching. She took Thorn into the woods, and they gathered berries. She boiled them, creating simple, beautiful dyes of pale pink and soft blue. She dipped the tunics, and they came out as colorful as wildflowers. Her joy, the pure, unburdened joy she thought was gone forever, came back. It came back with every clumsy plea, with every bright, shrieking laugh when a girl mastered a simple turn. She was not just teaching them to dance. She was teaching them to be proud of their bodies, to be joyful in their own skin. Thorn would come from the lumber yard, tired, his shirt stained with sweat, his hands raw. He would stand at the edge of the churchyard, his arms folded, and just watch. He watched her, surrounded by a gaggle of small, spinning girls, her face alight, her voice clear and happy. He saw her, not as the broken thing he had rescued, but as the strong, whole woman she was, the woman who was building a life from nothing but her own spirit. But the town was watching. Too, Sutter's Mill was a good place, but it was a small place, and small places had long memories and sharp eyes. They saw this new woman, this Miss Rosalie, who had no last name. They saw her, beautiful and graceful, who had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back, in the company of a scarred, silent man who had traded a rifle for a house. The whispers began in the sewing circles and over the fences. Where did she come from? No ring on her finger, living right above the store with him. And dance lessons. What kind of dancing did she do, I wonder? I heard a rumor. A man from Junction was through here. Said he recognized her. Said she was one of Jasper Dunn's girls. Rosalie felt the whispers like a change in the weather. She felt the eyes, the women who had been polite, who had nodded at her in the street, now turned away. They pulled their children a little closer. Her class of 6 dwindled to 4. The confrontation came, as it had to. She was at the general store, buying thread, Mrs. Prentice, the banker's wife. A tall, stern woman in a gray silk dress was there, holding court by the counter. As Rosalie went to pay, Mrs. Prentice stepped directly in her path. "Excuse me," Rosalie said politely. "Mrs." Prentice looked her up and down, her gaze lingering on Rosalie's simple calico dress. "We are a decent town, Miss. We are building a community here, for families." Rosalie felt her blood run cold. "We don't want your kind." "Mrs." Prentice said, her voice low and sharp, for Rosalie's ears only, but loud enough for the proprietor to hear. "We have heard all about Junction. We don't want that filth, teaching our children." And then, with a small, deliberate movement. "Mrs." Prentice turned her head and spat on the floor, just near the hem of Rosalie's skirt. The store went silent. The proprietor froze. The Rosalie of the Gilded Spur would have shattered. She would have fled, tears of shame blinding her, and she would have hidden in her dark room. But she was not that Rosalie. She had danced in the snow. She had fought for her life with a skillet. She had been loved by a good man. Rosalie stood still. She did not look at the floor. She did not cry. She looked calmly and directly into Mrs. Prentice's hard, judgmental eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it was clear, and it carried through the entire silent store. "I am not ashamed of surviving, Mrs. Prentice," she said. "Are you ashamed of judging?" Mrs. Prentice, for the first time in her life, was speechless. Her mouth opened, then closed. A dull red flush crept up her neck. Rosalie turned to the proprietor. "My thread, please, Mr. Gable." He, too, was stunned. He fumbled with her package. She paid. She picked up her small parcel, nodded once to him, and then, her back straight as a steel rod, her head held high, she walked out of the store, past the woman in gray silk. Thorne heard about it before the sun set. The town was buzzing. He came home to their room, his face dark. "I heard what happened at the store," he said, his voice a low growl. "I did, too," Rosalie said. She was sitting by the window, sewing. Her hands were steady. "She is a cruel woman. She will not bother you again," he said. "I know," Rosalie said, looking up at him. "But I could have handled it. Thorne, I did handle it." He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her face. The rage in his chest did not fade, but it was joined by a fierce, powerful pride. He nodded. "I know you did." He did not let it be. The next day, he saw Mrs. Prentice on the boardwalk. He was carrying a 50-pound sack of flour over his shoulder. He simply stopped in her path. He did not touch her. He did not threaten her. He just stood, his large, imposing body blocking her way. He looked at her, his gray eyes flat and cold, the scar on his jaw a white line. He looked at her the way he had looked at Jasper Dunn, Mrs. Prentice, who ruled the town with her sharp tongue, took one look at his face, at the silent, lethal promise in his eyes. And she was terrified. She stammered, turned, and scurried across the street, her errands forgotten. He did not have to say a word. The town saw, and the town understood. "You did not cross Mr. Thorne, and you did not cross Miss Rosalie." The whispers did not die, but they were silenced. And the next day, Rosalie's class had 8 students, including the blacksmith's girl and the mayor's daughter. The summer fair was the town's biggest event. It was a celebration of their first full year. There were pie-baking contests, a horse race, and a small stage for performances. Rosalie's students were the main attraction. In their small, flower-dyed tunics, they performed their simple, graceful routines. They were charming. The town applauded, the parents beaming. When they finished, the mayor stepped up. "And now, Suitor's Mill, a special performance by their teacher, who has brought such grace to our children, Miss Rosalie." A hush fell. This they had not expected. The gossipers looked at each other. This was either bravery or madness. Rosalie stepped onto the stage. She wore her best dress, a simple dark blue cotton. Her hair, which she usually wore in a neat bun, was unbound, flowing down her back. She was barefoot. She stood in the center of the stage. There was no music. She began to move. It was not the stiff, broken dance of the saloon. It was not the formal, trained ballet of her youth. It was something new. It was the story of her life. It was the pain of her past, the terror in the woods, the cold of the snow, the warmth of a hand, the joy of a kiss, the hope of a home. Her body was a vessel, and the emotion that poured out of it was so pure, so raw, that it held the entire town in a breathless spell. She danced with a joy that was almost painful to watch. a joy that had been earned through fire and fear. It was a dance of survival. It was a dance of thanks. When she finished, she stood, her chest heaving, her arms wide, her face turned to the sky. Silence. A deep, profound, absolute silence. Then, from the back, a single clap. It was Thorn. He stood by the edge of the crowd, his arms folded, his face open, his eyes wet. He was clapping, slow and steady. Then the blacksmith stood up, his face red, and he roared, his big hands clapping. His wife joined him, then the mayor, then, like a dam breaking, the entire town rose to its feet, the applause a thunderstorm of acceptance, of wonder, of apology. They had not seen a saloon girl. They had seen an artist. They had seen a soul. The gossip was dead. It had been danced to death. While Rosalie was teaching, Thorn was building. He had chosen the parcel well. It was on a small rise, overlooking the wildflower meadow they had dreamed of. Every evening after his work at the mill, he worked on their home. He did not rush. Every plank was cut true, every nail driven home with purpose. He built it with 2 rooms, and the second room, the one that faced the rising sun, was special. The floor was made of the finest, most cured pine. He had sanded it himself for weeks on his hands and knees until it was as smooth, as flawless, as polished satin. It was her studio. It was the home he had promised, the one no shadow could reach. They moved in at the end of the summer. Their lives settled into a new, beautiful rhythm. He would rise before dawn for the mill. She would rise with him to make his coffee. She would spend her days teaching or tending the small garden they had planted. He would come home and find her in the studio, dancing. Their nights were quiet. They sat on their new porch, his hand in hers, and they would talk. They talked about the children, about the garden, about the new roof on the church. They whispered dreams, a real piano. One day, perhaps their own children. They were not 2 ghosts anymore. They were 2 people, solid and real, building a future. One night, the first chill of autumn was in the air. A harvest moon hung, huge and orange, over the meadow. They sat on the porch step. Thorn was quiet for a long time, just holding her hand. "Rosalie," he said, his voice rough. She turned to him. He was not looking at her, but at the meadow. He turned and took both her hands in his. His were rough, calloused from the sawmill, but his grip was gentle. "I don't have a ring," he said, his voice low. I don't have anything. Really, just these hands. This house." He looked at her, his gray eyes full of a love so deep it was an ocean. "I'm not a man for fancy words, but I made a promise on that mountain, and I'll make it again. I will never, ever let this world hurt you again." It was not a question. It was a vow. It was his soul, laid bare. Tears welled in her eyes. Not of sadness, but of a joy so profound it filled her chest. She reached up and touched his scarred cheek. "Then I'll dance for joy. Always," she whispered, her voice thick, "with you watching." He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss of promises kept, of a future shared. The final scene, the one that played out every day, was the true vow. It was late afternoon, the sky a blaze of gold and rose. Thorn was walking home, his axe on his shoulder, tired from a long day. He came over the rise, and he stopped. She was in the meadow. The studio doors were wide open, and she was dancing. Not for a class, not for a town, but for the sky, for the grass, for the joy of being alive. He stood, his heart open, and just watched. He was not the scarred, broken man who had hidden from the world. He was her husband. She saw him. The dance did not stop. It changed. A brilliant, radiant smile lit her face. She ran to him. Her bare feet flew over the wildflowers, her hair streaming behind her. He dropped the axe. He opened his arms. She leaped, and he caught her. He lifted her high, high, his strong arms holding her fast, and he spun her around, just as she had been spinning. He spun, and she was light as air, laughing, a sound that was pure music. They spun together, two figures, one whole in the center of their meadow, bathed in the last golden light of the sky. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment below. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this, and share your thoughts with us. We love to hear from you.